You have joined a webinar focused on Check-in, Check-out. This is a part of a monthly webinar series that is being sponsored by the School Climate Transformation Grants and Safe and Healthy Students. The webinars are designed for state personnel and for district personnel and for school personnel who are actively engaged in implementing PBIS and multi-tiered systems of behavior support. The topic today is how to implement Check-in, Check-out in the context of a multi-tiered system of support. This particular content was selected in part based on recommendations and requests from those of you who submitted information as part of your annual reports to Safe and Healthy Students. The next webinars will be on December 7th, and Kent McIntosh will do a webinar on sustaining PBIS. And then on January 18, Lucille Eber and Susan Barrett will do a webinar that integrates PBIS with social emotional learning and mental health efforts. So we are trying once a month to have a seminar or a webinar that ties the different pieces together. A video of this webinar with related materials, the request for assistance form and the technical assistance and fidelity of implementation forms will all be available to anyone who is interested on pbis.org. Go under presentations and you'll be able to download things. We will do a couple of polls as we go along, and we know that some of you are at computers with multiple people attending. So we ask one person to take the lead and offer the average of the group at any point in time. And there will be a time for questions at the end for those of you who have additional questions. I want to start also by thanking Ivan Polk, who is providing support. And if at any time during the webinar you run into questions or concerns, you can email Ivan, and you can look in the chat box on your screen and you can see his email address, ipolk@uoregon.edu. I also want to extend special thanks to George Sugai, Ann Todd, Celeste Rosetto-Dickey, and especially Leanne Hawken, all of whom have contributed to the content that we're going to go through. Okay, so let's rock and roll. So here we go. The target audiences for today and the goals for today are really twofold. One, a number of you who asked questions and made comments as part of your annual reports indicated that you were feeling confident about implementing Tier 1 behavior support systems. You were either using PBIS or you were using another strategy, restorative practice, second step to success. You had a Tier 1 system going, and you were looking and considering different Tier 2 systems to implement. So for you, one of the goals for today is to provide enough detail that you get an overview of what Check-in, Check-out looks like and the extent to which Check-in, Check-out would fit as a role or opportunity for you in your district or your school. A second is a number of teams, about 20% of the grantees who submitted indicated that you were already launching and implementing Check-in, Check-out. You're getting Check-in, Check-out technical assistance and training from local providers. You looked at the videos and the related written material that's available on Check-in, Check-out. And so for those of you who are doing this, our experience is you get started and it doesn't exactly work the way that you thought it would. So my task is, given that we only have an hour, to give an overview of what the critical features are. And my hope would be, for those of you who are thinking about getting started, you have enough detail to say, how would our team now move forward in deciding whether to use Checkin Checkout or not? For those of you who are already implementing Checkin Checkout, you've got some information that says, well, what are some of the things that we would like to consider doing differently, either to get it to work or to get it to work better? So within the next 45 to 50 minutes, you ought to be able to define the logic and basic characteristics of any targeted or Tier 2 intervention. So those of you who are using ripple effects or restorative practices or restorative justice, those using trauma-informed systems like CBITS or like that, those of you who are using the more advanced forms of second step, whatever you're using, any Tier 2 practice should have a core set of key features. So let's go through and make sure that you're feeling good about what those look like. Second, I want to make sure that we're actually walking through and you've got a good understanding of what the critical components of Checkin Checkout look like. Too often, people use Checkin Checkout, but the only thing they do is the daily progress report. They don't actually implement the other elements. So one of the things that we want to make sure is that you've got a good understanding of what does this really look like. And then for schools, districts, or even states that are moving forward, what would be the elements of an action plan that you would really put in place? So with those as the goals, give me a little bit of a quick idea. So this is in part for those of you who have just checked in. Part of what I'm interested in is to what extent in your school, or if you're a district or a state, your implementation unit, to what extent are you already doing Tier 1 PBIS well? So if you could go on the chat box that's there and click on whether your current TFI score is 0 to 50, 50 to 70, 70 to 80, and this is the TFI score only for Tier 1. So the idea is to get a little bit of a sense of to what extent are you feeling pretty good about implementation of the Tier 1 systems. So just click on the bars. Some of you are doing that, some not so much. All right, so of the two that have been willing to, or three, there we go. So we've got a little bit of, we've got at least some programs that are implementing really well, some that are still early on, so that's helpful. That's helpful to know. Second question is, are you actually currently implementing Checkin Checkout? So Ivan, if you can move poll 1 off and give people access to the second one. Thank you. So people are not currently, some are. Okay, good, good. So we have about an even split between people who are already implementing Checkin Checkout and people who are considering Checkin Checkout. So that's helpful, and we'll go through that. The next poll that I'm going to get to, and I'm going to give a little content first, is going to ask for the specific questions you might have. So if you've got specific things that you're wanting to make sure we get, either about how to adopt Checkin Checkout or how to adapt what you're already doing. So be prepared for that in just a little bit. So let me give you just a little bit of content moving forward. Regardless of what you're already doing, so those of you who are already implementing Tier 1 well, you're in a great position. Those of you who are not quite there, One of the messages I would give is we typically recommend adopting Checkin Checkout only after you've got Tier 1 in place. The preliminary data that we've got from 2 syntheses and 1 meta-analysis suggests that if you implement PBIS or you implement your Tier 1 well, first, using that as the foundation, you're more likely to adopt Checkin Checkout effectively, and more importantly, this is really key, if you implement Checkin Checkout, it's more likely to endure. So one of the things that we really want to come back to over and over again is, regardless of what Tier 2 strategy you're looking at, always look at it as building on your existing Tier 1 systems. Second, regardless of the kind of Tier 2 practice, whether you're using Checkin Checkout, ripple effects, restorative practice, whatever you're doing, be really clear with your staff and with others about what it is you're trying to accomplish. So here are the things that we've looked at. A Tier 2 strategy should increase instruction. It should add additional information on how to behave appropriately. Second, the Tier 2 intervention should increase structure. And one of the things you're going to see with Checkin Checkout is it builds rhythmic points during the day when you get feedback about social behavior. It also, we typically build structure even if we're doing reading or math. So you're going to come back. Any Tier 2 intervention starts by increasing instruction, it increases structure, it increases the frequency and opportunity for feedback, especially positive feedback. Fourth, one of the things that a Tier 2 intervention does is it increases the likelihood that mistakes, either behavioral mistakes or academic mistakes, will be corrected quickly. So one of the things that we want is when students make errors, we don't want those errors to go completely ignored. We want them to get feedback quickly, and get feedback that is instructional rather than punitive. The fifth piece that all Tier 2, good empirically supported Tier 2 strategies include is an increase in the use of data. And the data that's collected is typically 2 forms. 1, are we implementing what we said we would do? 2, does it actually work? So all of these 5 key features work whether you're doing Tier 3 literacy, Tier 3 numeracy, or Tier 3 behavior support. Now, if we actually look and we say, okay, what are the logistics features? So again, regardless of the Tier 2 strategy, here are things that you would be looking for. And this is going to be important. Those of you who are thinking about how would we build and add a Tier 2 to our current systems, one of the things that's important, a good Tier 2 system should be continuously available. That means it is not something where you identify the student and then go and try and find a practice. If you're going to adopt a Tier 2 practice, it should be something that is rhythmically available all the time. You should have enough students that you've always got some people on it. Second is it should be something where if the teacher or staff identify a student as needing Tier 3 supports, it should not take a long time. It should be something you can do within 3 days or within a week. It should not be something where it takes 2 months to get a student on an additional level of support. The other thing that is really important and is underemphasized in too many programs, a Tier 2 system should be excruciatingly efficient. It should require very little time on the part of the regular day-to-day teaching staff. Our rule for Checkin Checkout, and this is going to be important when you're talking with teachers about if this is something they can use or would like to use, it should take no more than 10 minutes of teacher time per day for all students on Checkin Checkout. And to do that, that means that a middle school teacher or an elementary school teacher should have no more than 3 students at a time on Check-in, Check-out. If you've got a teacher who has 5, 8, 10 kids on Check-in, Check-out, that's a good example of the system not working. The other issues should be consistent with school-wide expectations. That's part of the building on what you're already doing. It should be something that all staff are familiar with, because if you're going to do this quickly and continuously, everybody needs to know what's going on and what their role is. Now, the homeschool linkage is a more controversial piece. I'm going to come back to that when we talk more specifically about Check-in, Check-out. It increases the intensity of whatever intervention you've got, but if you're doing a Tier 2 behavior intervention, it should be linked to the function of the behavior. Now, the difference is you may not be conducting a functional behavioral assessment. You may not even be doing an informal assessment, but the team, as they go forward with the Check-in, Check-out or with a Tier 2 behavior support plan, needs to make at least a hypothesis indicating what's not just what the student does, but why they keep doing it. If you're going to do a Tier 2 intervention within MTSS, you also are going to need to make sure that before you get started, you've actually identified the resources that are available. Now, those of you who are getting early on in this process, I actually want you to star this. Of the mistakes that we see when people adopt both Tier 2 and Tier 3, is they do a much better job of adopting the approach than they do about building the resources to implement the approach. Now, if you're going to adopt Check-in, Check-out, Check-in, Check-out in a school of 500 students will require about 10 hours a week of coordination and support. And unless you've identified where those 10 hours come from, launching Check-in, Check-out will be highly frustrating. Now, the thing that I want you to remember, in almost 0 of the schools we've worked with, did they add personnel to implement Check-in, Check-out. Check-in, Check-out has always been adopted using existing FTE and resources. What's happened is school psychologists, counselors, social workers, special educators, or the clerical and coordination staff in the front office have been the people who provided the 10 hours that are necessary. But one of the critical variables, make sure you've got the resources to implement. The other piece that I think is underemphasized in most Tier 2 support systems, and I like how restorative practice and ripple effects do this, but I don't see it in enough of the other programs. If we do Tier 2 well, it builds self-regulation, self-management, independence of the student. Don't build a program that makes the student dependent on ongoing support. So with those as the key features, with those as key features for any logistical system, let's talk just a little bit for the half of the group that is really interested in saying, is this something that we would want to adopt? Let me give you just a quick suggestion. One of the strategies that has been very helpful for other schools and especially districts has been to use the hexagon tool that Dean Fixon and his staff at the University of North Carolina, the CICO or Scaling Up Technical Assistance Center, have used. And you can download and get access to this at sisep.org, sisep.org. But basically what the hexagon tool does is it presents 6, hence the hex, suggestions. If you are considering adopting any Tier 2 support, if you're going to adopt the social skills clubs that are frequently used in Missouri, if you're going to adopt the more advanced pieces of ripple effects or CBITs, do this. Ask yourself the question, do we really need this? What proportion of the students do we have that are really in need? Does it fit with the values and the ongoing multi-tiered systems that we have? Do we have the resources? And this would be the place in part to say, do we have, if you're going to adopt check-in, check-out, the 10 hours? Is there evidence that what we're doing actually makes a difference for students and can be done in schools like ours? Do we have the readiness opportunities? So are we able to say we can do the training, we can set aside the time, and then do we have the capacity, not just financially and with FTE, but do we have the people who are knowledgeable about the behavioral practices and systems? So one thing that is often helpful, take a look over here. The recommendation is need, high, medium, or low. Is fit, high, medium, or low. Is resource availability, high, medium, or low. And you can go through and do an audit. Doing this with a team and even, quite frankly, with a faculty has been very helpful for schools that are saying, look, we've got a need. Is this the innovation or the intervention or the practice that we want to adopt? All right, so that's a little bit of background. Those of you who are thinking we want to adopt something that's a Tier 2 support, how does considering check-in, check-out fit with any steps that you might use in terms of looking at how would we go about that process? Now, in terms of considering check-in, check-out, here are the reasons why we think this is really something that is worthy of your consideration. First off, the research indicates that check-in, check-out is effective. It works. A series of different studies have indicated that on average, 67% of students that are placed on check-in, check-out reduce their level of problem behavior by at least 50% within 3 weeks. All right, so you actually get a reduction in problem behavior. The other thing is that check-in, check-out is practical. It requires no new resource or information or technical input. What it does require is the reallocation of some FTE up to that 10 hours a week part. And a great thing, those of you who are really looking at saying, well, come on, I need something that shows that this works that I can share with the faculty. Dan Magan and his staff did a synthesis of the available literature looking at check-in, check-out, and the citation is given there on the slide. Take a look at that article, that paper, because what he basically indicates is after looking at this, we can actually argue that check-in, check-out is a credible evidence-based practice that we can move forward with. So, with that as a starting point, check-in, check-out has 3 main purposes and a core set of key elements. So what I'd like to do is to give those a quick run through. Then I'm going to ask you, I'm going to give you a minute to say, are there specific questions that you want to make sure we get to in the next 40 minutes? So if you've got things that are going to be critical, I want to make sure that we get to that. The purposes of check-in, check-out. The first and foremost purpose is to increase the self-regulation and self-management that students have. And that means building self-monitoring, self-evaluation, and self-recruitment skills. Self-recruitment means to what extent are you able to recruit the support that you need to be successful. We want to see a reduction in problem behavior, especially in classroom and school environments. And if we do this well, we should actually see an increase in academic engagement. Academic engagement meaning the proportion of 10-second intervals that the students actually are paying attention to teachers and to academic work. If check-in, check-out is successful, you don't just get a reduction in problem behavior, you also get an increase in academic success. Key features. So those of you who are thinking about how does this work, you need to have a team, and the team needs to have a person who is coordinating the check-in, check-out. Now, you don't necessarily have to have a team that is only a check-in, check-out team. You can have the Tier 2 PBIS team, or you can do, in many schools, they have a Tier 1 team, and then they'll have a Tier 2, Tier 3 team, and the Tier 2, Tier 3 team does Tier 2 support in one meeting, and then the next meeting, they do Tier 3. Then they do Tier 2, then they do Tier 3. We recognize that smaller elementary and middle schools are going to have team structures that are slightly different than larger schools, and certainly different than high schools. One of the most exciting things about Checkin, Checkout right now is the work that Bridget Flannery and Mimi Cato are doing, extending some of the elements of Checkin, Checkout, automating them, making them much more self-managed by the student and appropriate for high school. A key feature, though, is you should be able to say, show me the team that is managing Checkin, Checkout and who the coordinator is. You need to have an operational process for identifying and selecting students. Now, there are two pieces that are consistently missed. One is if a student is selected for Checkin, Checkout, that student needs a formal orientation to what are the routines and how does this work. So I'm going to come back to what does the student orientation look like. But more recently, one of the things we've learned from Leanne Hawken is it's really helpful to actually have a faculty or staff orientation. So if Elaine or Elliot are placed on Checkin, Checkout, actually doing a quick review with their teacher or teachers on how is this going to work makes a huge difference on whether it happens. The Checkin, Checkout process has 3 different cycles. One is the daily school cycle, one is the class or period Checkin, Checkout cycle, and then the other is the cycle that is done by the staff looking at data. Family engagement is something that gets added much more in elementary than in middle and high school, but that's a variable we need to talk about. The point exchange system is done well in some schools and is missed in others. So again, I want to come back to that. If you were to think about the big parts of Checkin, Checkout, this figure is one that we find to be really helpful. So it's all about cycles. And like I said, the first cycle is this one where the student comes to school, checks in, at the end of the day, checks out, goes home, there's a check-in at home. So it's morning check-in, afternoon check-out, home check-in, and that becomes a rhythmic part. During the school day, there's another cycle, and that is done in middle schools and high schools. Each time the student goes into a class, they check in or they check out. In elementary schools, it's done typically by period. So when we do math, when we do literacy, and even in elementary schools, going on the playground. So here's what we've learned. The class check-ins, you don't have to do every single class period. The rule in general is you want to have the student check in the morning, check out in the afternoon, and have at least 3 structured points in time where they check in and out with the instructional staff or with the playground or monitoring staff. So don't get obsessive about saying every time there's a change, the student needs to do checking in and checking out. Build it in with the rhythm of the day. The third cycle that is really important is with the adults. The collecting of data, and remember there's always 2 sets of data. Are we doing what we said we would do, and is it benefiting the student? and then looking at the extent to which we need to increase or decrease what goes forward. So let's take just a quick stop right there. I always worry in webinars about doing too much talking and getting going off into directions that are not helpful. So we're going to take 2 minutes. For those of you who are considering using Checkin, Checkout, and you're worried about, now how is this going to work? Go on to the site right now and give me what would be the key features you would like information about. If we're going to select and launch Checkin, Checkout, what do we need to know? Now, if you're already using Checkin, Checkout, then answer the other polls. So there are 2 polls that are available to you. You're perfectly welcome to answer both, but right now, take a moment. If you're thinking about using Checkin, Checkout, what are the burning questions that you think your staff or your district or your state TA people need to know? If you're already using Checkin, Checkout, what are questions or issues you've come up with? So 2 minutes. Go for it. Okay, we've got 2 questions that have been proposed. Let me give a quick response to those. If there are more coming in, that's going to be just fine. You can add to this as we go forward. So the first question at the top is there an easy way to assess implementation fidelity for evaluating the intervention? The answer is yes. There are 2 easy ways to do this. The first is to use the Tier 2 section of the Tiered Fidelity Inventory. If you go through the TFI and you use Checkin, Checkout as the practice of concern, that will allow you to go through and determine if you've got most of the core features. A second is we actually have built a Checkin, Checkout fidelity assessment. And that will be, I'm going to show you an example of that on these slides. And it's also going to be available, you can download it off of the PBIS.org website. So we would be happy for you to be able to do fidelity either way. The Checkin, Checkout checklist is especially a fast, easy thing you could do. You could do that 2 or 3 times a year, as you can, quite frankly, the Tier 2 TFI questions. So that's the way to deal with implementation fidelity. With respect to the questions down below, looking first at, are there decision rules for identifying, let me see if do I have this right? What are appropriate decision rules for identifying students? Let me do that. There's a slide coming up that actually has exactly what those are. So the identifying of the students, essentially, the short answer is you want students who are engaging in early levels of problem behavior. They are not engaging in behavior that places students at risk. They are engaging in behaviors that are linked, in most cases, academically. And the most important thing is that the students identify adult behavior as reinforcing. It's not that their problem behavior is maintained by adult attention. It's that the students identify adult attention as something that is reinforcing. The other pieces related to training for the team are exactly what I'm going to cover in the next few steps. So excellent questions. Let me go forward and let's see to what extent we can deal with this. We are a site of over 1,200 students and are considering implementing Checkin-Checkout for our at-risk students. Can you explain where the 10 hours for 500 students, where is this time spent? Yes, I can. So the 10 hours are spent at the beginning of the day, at the end of the day, and coordinating the team. If you have 1,200 students, you may, depending on the grade levels that you've got, want to set up 2 different check-in-checkout teams. High schools, for example, that adopt check-in-checkout are encouraged to have 1 team only for freshmen and another team for sophomores, juniors, and seniors. It depends on how your school is set up. If you want to check with me individually, I'd be happy to talk with you about the status that you've found. Let me go through how this works and what some of the questions are, and then let's see if we've gotten these at a level that's going to be helpful to you. Excellent queries. Good for you. All right. Part of what I want you to take away is, why does Checkin-Checkout work? So the big things. 1, Checkin-Checkout works because it increases the students' predictability and daily structure. So they've got times of day when they know what's going to happen and when it's going to happen. Second, Checkin-Checkout is designed to set the student up for success. So there's this notion called behavioral momentum. And it goes like this. If you start a day or you start a period with success, the likelihood that you're going to have more success during the period doubles. If you start with failure or correction, the likelihood that you're going to turn that around and achieve something positive is low. Students who are at risk behaviorally very often get in trouble within the first half hour of school. They get in trouble oftentimes before school even starts. So here's what I want you to be thinking of. Check-in-checkout is designed to say the very first thing you do when you show up at the school is you go and check in with somebody who's happy to see you and indicates that you've done something right. Second is, at least 3 times during the day, I want you to check in with an adult who uses your name, indicates they're happy to see you, and helps to set you up for success. So, and the reason for that is the literature says that's the smallest thing you can do that will have the biggest impact on successful behavior over the next 15 minutes. So a big feature of Checkin-Checkout is this whole notion of setting things up for success. Increase in contingent feedback. If we do things well, students are much more likely to get positive feedback, but as importantly, if they do something wrong, they're able to get corrective instructional feedback quickly. It's not delayed as long as it typically is. Check-in-checkout is also something that can be applied everywhere. It works in classroom, in hallway, in cafeteria, in playground. You can adapt the check-in-checkout system to work under all conditions. A big variable is it elevates the likelihood that the student gets acknowledged for doing things right. And especially as we looked at middle school students who were at risk, part of what we saw when we basically shadowed them for a period of for a day or 2 days was that on a regular basis they got feedback about things they were doing wrong, but they seldom got feedback about what they were doing right. When we increase the likelihood that they get feedback for what they do right, it changes a lot of the way in which they interact, both with peers and with adults. Build in a link with home and school. And part of what is really important is if we do this well, we increase the support for a student, but only for a small period of time. Check-in-checkout is designed to be effective within a 6 to 12 week period. It is typically not an assignment that goes the whole school year or that is going to operate forever. So part of what I want you to be thinking of over and over again is not just how do we get an initial effect, but how do we get that effect to work primarily by building the self-management and self-regulation skills. The link that I talked about before ties in not just with reducing problem behavior, but increasing academic engagement and support. The other piece that makes Checkin Checkout work is it does not require high effort on the part of the teaching staff. The teaching staff does not need to remember. The teaching staff does not need to initiate. A critical thing about Checkin Checkout is the student prompts the teacher. Remember that part about teaching the student how to recruit what they need? Over and over, what you do is you have a situation where we're teaching the student how to get things that they need from the adults. So let's go through real quickly. The team, typically, I talked about is you need either a Tier 2 team or a Tier 2, Tier 3 team. The check-in, check-out process can be managed by as few as 3 people. You've got a coordinator, you've got a couple of people who are collecting and managing the data. It does not require a lot of people, but it does require regular input. Come back to our picture. So let's take a look at what the key elements of check-in, check-out are looking like and how those are going to play out over time. So we've got about 15 minutes. I'm going to go through this fairly quickly, but what I would like to do is get to the point where you're saying, okay, I've got a pretty good idea of what the elements are and where I would go to find out additional information. So you've got a coordinator and a team, the identification process. So when you look at which students are most appropriate for check-in, check-out, here's what we typically do. This would be an example of a request for assistance form that a school could use. Teachers could say, this is a student who I think is appropriate for check-in, check-out. The critical features are typically that the Tier 1 system is in place and we're still getting rates of problem behavior that are unacceptable. The type of problem behavior does not place the student or others at actual physical risk. It's moderate to low intensity. And the student still is someone where we could look and say, who are adults in the building that the student finds rewarding? So in most cases, if you are being nominated for check-in, check-out, if you have 2 or more major office discipline referrals, the likelihood that you're going to get more referrals is high. That would be a student who is appropriate. If what's happening is you're getting an increase in the rate of low intensity inappropriate interactions with adults, that would be an indication that check-in, check-out would be appropriate. The check-in, check-out can be nominated from 4 different sources: from the teachers, from administrators and related services personnel, by the student, and from the family. And an interesting thing is we find that students who have been on check-in, check-out, a small but larger than we would think proportion of students who have been on check-in, check-out at 1 or more times in their career will come back and actually request to go back on check-in, check-out. So 2 or more major office discipline referrals, teachers who are indicating that the student is elevating their rate of low intensity problem behaviors, or situations in which not just the office discipline referrals, but the number of behavioral contacts has increased. The piece about adult attention rewarding is going to be important. Be careful. This is not saying that problem behavior is maintained by adult attention. All it's saying is that the student identifies adult attention as a functional reinforcer. We oftentimes really want to make sure that if a student is selected for check-in, check-out, they go through an actual orientation or a training. it is helpful if the student actually chooses to say, yes, I'm interested in participating. And that's harder to do when they don't know what they're getting into, but start looking for a way in which you build choice into the protocol. The bigger issue is if you're going to do check-in, check-out, you actually need to teach these routines with the student. Teach them, how does morning routine happen? How does classroom check-in happen? How does classroom check-out happen? And these are not complicated routines. These can be taught in less than 5 minutes. Using role play is very, very effective. The interesting thing, I want you to especially focus on the time to teach the routine of you're checking out with a teacher. Let's say you're in 4th period algebra and you're checking out. You go up and the teacher says, hey, you did a good job, you get 2s on everything. How do you handle that? Part of what we found is students who are at risk behaviorally have almost as much trouble receiving positive messages as they do receiving corrective on instructional feedback. So in part, teach both. If somebody gives you good feedback, say thanks and you go about your day. If they say, look, I'm not giving you all the points, I'm giving you a 1 here and a 0 here because of this and this, how do you handle that? So walk through, and it depends whether you're talking to a 4th grader or a 5th grader. Notice that we typically have used check-in, check-out with 4th grade and above. When it's been used with 1st, 2nd, and 3rd graders, it takes some adaptation. I'll talk about that in a minute. The end of the day checkout routine needs to be one that's basically always positive. You're rewarding the student for returning the information, and it's always focused on what we're going to do to make tomorrow a more effective process. Teach them how they're going to do exchange of points and negotiate with the student the role that the family is going to play. And in part, sometimes this can be an incredibly positive feature. In other cases, less so. So, 1, student orientation. To the extent you can, build in an opportunity for the student to choose to be part of the system. 2, think about the routines that best fit your school and actively teach these routines. This does not, you can do the whole thing in less than 15 minutes, but it's important to go through and actually make sure that the student can't just say it, they can do it. The last part is the part that is not in most of the literature and is increasingly something that we're encouraging. When a student first launches check-in, check-out, it is really helpful to go with that student to the teacher or teachers they'll be doing it with and just rehearsing what it's going to look like. That is typically in middle schools, it's done in a 10 to 15 minute process at the beginning before school starts with the 4 teachers that the student is going to interact with. In elementary school, it's much easier. In high school, it's a lot more complicated, but you're figuring out, guide the initial process, and the likelihood that it will work just about doubles. The staff orientation is also something that the team needs to pay attention to. There's one orientation that you do as part of a faculty meeting. The faculty meeting, why are we doing this? How does it fit? What is your role? What is our role? And what are the data that we will be sharing? The second is when you're actually doing the launch, going in with the student and sort of saying, okay, we're just letting you know Elliot is going to be bringing the check-in, check-out card. He's going to be bringing it to you and doing this. So how's that going to work? Teacher says, great, that's going to be okay. Everybody is then informed and ready to rock and roll. That's part of where the 10 hours person comes in. Now, the other pieces, the morning check-in. So here's part of what happens. You need a place in the school, typically not a classroom. So it can be in the front office, it can be in the counseling area, it can be in any of the different places where a student starts the day by showing up, interacting with an adult who is clearly able to indicate they're happy they're there, checks if they're ready to go forward for the day, and either gives them the check-in, check-out card, or if they are using an automated version, launches the automated version. The critical thing, the morning check-in, the person who does the morning check-in, you've got about 15 seconds with each student. So I want you to look at their eyes, their forehead, their shoulders, their fingers, get them to say something and listen to their voice. If the student is ready to go forward, if they have the materials and they seem just fine, then they are ready to launch their day. If they clearly are on drugs, in an agitated state, in a clearly unlikely to succeed form, then part of what you're going to do is implement an alternative routine. Keep the student in the front office, connect them with the counseling or support personnel, and you're going to resolve the physiological arousal or the dangerous context that they're in before putting them back into class. So that's part of the morning check-in. The teacher checks are much, much faster. Here's what we've learned. When a student enters the class, they make some type of contact that's positive with the teacher, that's a huge plus. The best of all possible is when the teacher says, "Hey, I'm glad you're here," uses the student's name, and gives them 5 seconds of guidance on what's going to happen at the beginning of class. Sets them up. It's called instructional priming, and doing instructional priming is very, very easy. So it takes 5 to 7 seconds at the beginning of class, and then at the end of class, you want the student to come up and the teacher gives feedback. To what extent were you doing things well? To what extent can you do things better? So there are ways in which you've got the student interacting with different adults. Now, part of what I want you to really think about, and I know we're running out of time, is part of what you're really trying to achieve is you want to increase the likelihood that at-risk students interact positively with adults. At-risk students build a pattern where they actually do everything they can to avoid interacting with adults. That's a dangerous process. So part of what we're looking for is building a formal protocol for doing this. The daily progress record or report is simply a card that helps to structure this process. It decreases the complexity of the interaction. We recommend that you use the school expectations, not expectations that are tailored to the individual student. Keep this excruciatingly efficient. And each period, the teacher or teachers give the student feedback. Were you safe? Were you respectful? Were you responsible? It adds up to a set of points. We typically use 80% as a target. Don't try and get 100% all of the time. And make it clear to the teachers that the most important thing that they're trying to do is capture getting things right. It is perfectly appropriate to indicate when things are wrong, but most of the time they're going to be indicating when the student gets things right. Check-in, check-out works when we increase the number of times that the student is acknowledged for doing things right. The other thing that we've learned is we've added to the card, and this is again something that will be new for those of you who have seen this before. We add a check of, did you greet the teacher when you came in? Yes or no? And greeting the teacher is also a place where, in some cases, you can actually add additional points. We're looking at different ways in which we've been doing this. You make the point card fit the developmental level of the students. And like I said before, in middle school and high school, we're actually shifting where the card is going away, and instead we're using iPads or an electronic version as a way to keep track of the delivery of the check-in, check-out. The whole point is to increase the likelihood that at-risk students actually communicate before they've done something wrong with adults in their environment. The afternoon checkout is very similar to the morning. Home checks, you build in if it fits for the students. We have about 30 to 40% of students on Checkin Checkout who also do the home check. Many students, especially high school and middle, choose not to do the home check. That's a decision that you've got to make. The literature is really clear. The home checks are not essential for Checkin Checkout to work. We think it's something you should always try to build in, but common sense and good judgment should always make it work. Now, the meeting that the staff use, you're going to be doing the process of looking at saying, to what extent do the data indicate that we've got success? You need some way where you're keeping track, and in this case, we're saying keep track of the percent of points on a daily basis. And you can do it in Excel, you can do it in CICO Swiss, you can even do it in some of the school information systems. But part of what you're looking for is what proportion of points do students get correct. So this would be Ryan's example. He's clearly above 80 on a regular basis. Here's Rochelle. She started off doing well. Clearly, she's going down and we want to adjust. You want something that allows you to say, when do they meet their criteria or their goal and when do they not? So the red dots are below criteria, the green dots are above, but that just helps to take a look. Notice also that the vertical lines are a way of keeping track of when you make changes to the Checkin Checkout system. The blue bar indicates when there's an office referral. The things that you're looking for: one, you want something that allows the team to say things aren't working, we made a change, we adjust quickly. You don't wait for long periods of time. You should give Checkin Checkout at least 2 weeks to have an effect. If it doesn't have an effect within 2 weeks, adjust. You can actually start fading off of Checkin Checkout after 6 weeks. The fading process involves allowing the student to adopt more of the judgment call, and the teacher simply confirms or disconfirms what the student does. Do that for 2 weeks, and then you can actually drop the card altogether. In terms of looking at the data, one of the things that we've learned is look at the individual periods. These are data for a student. These are simulated data. Here's period 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And it doesn't just give the percent correct for the whole day. It gives the percent correct across the days in period 5, in period 4. This allows the team to quickly identify that for Mark Banks, period 3 is where they really need to focus. You also, as a building administrator, you want data that allow you to look across students. So if we were to say, of the 4 students on Checkin Checkout, are we doing pretty well with these 3? If we are, we don't spend a lot of time with them in the meeting. This would be the student that we would want to look at with greater care. So data systems, you want 3 things: percent of points correct. 2, you want to be able to sort that by school period. And 3rd, by school, you want to be able to sort by student. So those are the features that you're looking at as you go through. And the question that was asked before about how do we keep track of fidelity? So here is the Checkin Checkout self-assessment. This is a form that you can download off of PBIS.org. It gives the elements of Checkin Checkout, asks if they're in place and not in place, and just like all of the materials that we typically use, it leads directly to a action planning document. Okay, so what I've tried to do is to go through in a reasonably brief amount of time the information that allocates across the core features of Check-in, Check-out. I've got additional slides that are in here that show the research, but if we basically summarize, the big ideas go like this. Check-in, Check-out is a targeted intervention. It is one option that has high research credibility. It is something that schools at elementary, middle, and even high have been able to implement with high efficiency. And part of what we see is we see at least 2/3 of students that are actually able to implement with success. In the 2 or 3 minutes that we have left, this would be a time for you to go into the chat box and say, are there additional questions or are there other issues that we could deal with at the very end? I know this was a lot of information in a very short period of time. The argument was this was not a training in Check-in, Check-out. It was rather an introduction for teams that are considering if this is something that you want to look into more detail. And for teams that were already implementing, I wanted to make sure that we focused on the array of different elements that were there. So the PowerPoint will be available on PBIS.org, the self-assessment checklist, and the student identification checklist materials will also be available and downloadable. What are the average number of check-in, check-out persons can do each morning? A morning person can do 45 is about the top. So if you're looking at having more than that, I would recommend 2 different rooms. Is there a process for implementing? Is there training? Yes, there actually are training materials that Leanne Hawken has put together. There's a very nice video and there's a book that is very readable and accessible that you can use. So Hawken, H-A-W-K-E-N, she is a professor of special education at the University of Utah and has done excellent work. There are also PowerPoint and training materials that you can download off of PBIS.org that are available. Other questions? Sarah, this was helpful. Good, I'm glad, thank you. So that is the material that we can do within the very brief period of time that we've got. If you have additional questions or thoughts that come up, or if you share this with your staff, one of the slides that we went over that I skipped over is the one that says, yeah, but. And it has a set of queries when you present this to staff where they say, yeah, this sounds good, but we can't do this, we can't do this, we can't do this. I would be more than happy to either talk with you in a go-to meeting or interact on email if you have questions like that that come up. So thank you very much for spending the morning with us. Ivan, thank you again for coordinating. And at this point, this will end the webinar. Thank you.